Okay, so we're gonna start. So the first thing, key to a wet stone is it's got to be wet. It doesn't. You just keep putting water on it. It's fine. That's why I always do it at the sink. And the first thing you're gonna do is know that your angle of the knife should be 17 degrees. That's not important. What is important is getting a feel for where that edge is and staying with it all the time. You don't want to go one stroke too steep like that, the next one too shallow, and you definitely never want to cut into it, the stone. You'll wreck the stone and the edge. So you get a feel for it after a while, play around with it. It's only something that will take time, and you'll become more comfortable with doing it. So this is a basic tutorial. I won't go into too many details, but you can want to keep the blade in contact with the stone the entire time at that angle. As you're pushing forward, you also want to move the blade across here, so you get the whole length of the blade. There is a technique where you can go straight back and forth this way, which is fine, but what happens when you get into the rounded edge here, it gets really tricky of where to find it. So that's why I like to do this method. So you do 10-ish, and you want to do that way. One of the tricks I found for doing it is almost like shaving. You can see that you pull the water up. If you're kind of pulling the water up, you know you're kind of on the right track for that. And you can see I'm kind of doing 2 strokes here. That doesn't really matter. You get comfortable with that after a while doing both. But you can stick just with the primary one this way for now if you wish. And the key is to try to use as much of the stone from back to front as you can. And if you just stayed in the middle and did your strokes like this, the stone would actually wear in the middle and wouldn't be flat. You want it to be as flat as possible because that'll give you a good edge, and your stone will last. If it doesn't, if you screw it up and you wind up wearing a groove in the stone, flip the stone around. There is a retruing diamond stone that you can buy, and you scrub it over top and it makes everything flat again, but I don't have one. I just try to be very careful with it when I do. So that's. So I've lost count. I think about the same here. As you go along, you'll start to feel, okay, that feels a little better. One of the key things and difficult to understand about sharpening a knife is as the knife sharpens and you're pushing against it, you're never pulling the knife, you're pushing it against it. The edge of the knife, actually, the metal, it gets what's called a burr. And as you go one way, this way, the burr actually builds up on there, and it's like this folded over metal part. And that's actually what you want. The idea is that you keep bending it back and forth until eventually that burr will break off, and I'll show you that later. But that's where all this stuff comes from here. And then what you're left with is the edge of the knife is razor sharp. How sharp? It just depends on your preference. Me, I like it. My test is a slightly overripe tomato or lime. If I can cut one of those, then I know I'm all right. Okay, I think that's okay for the 1000. Put that back into my water. And now I'm going to go to the 3000. That knife a little rinse. Some of the metal grit off of there. And just like on the 1000, we'll just continue along like that. Now, one of the hardest things to get is how hard do you actually press on there? Well, I can tell you, I liken it to writing with a pen. You don't want to push like you're with an old pencil, you know, where you really had to get into the grit of it. And what you want to, or a razor. So, you know, just enough to shave it, but you don't want to dig into the stone, especially if you get into the higher grits, because they're really soft and you can actually gouge and cut the stone. Now, I understand that you probably have the same knife as me, the Tajiro, which you got to be very careful of that part right there, because that becomes razor sharp like a needle, and you can very easily gouge yourself. So if you want later, you can actually dull that down to protect yourself. I like it super sharp because I use it for some things, but and what I'm doing when I do that, I'm not only checking sharpness, but I'm also checking to see if where the burr is. If you feel it, you can feel a little bit of a burr that builds up, and that's when you want to break the burr off by going back on that side. And the burr will almost make the knife feel like it's getting duller. So if it is like that, just flip it over the other side and go back a couple of strokes. And as you go, we'll rinse that off. What you want to see is down the edge of the blade, you'll see that edge start to become more uniform. That one shiny bead, about 30/2 of an inch, I guess, maybe a millimeter, where it will come even. And that's what you're eventually looking for with a sharp knife. Yeah. Now to 4,000. Now these are the softer, much softer stones. Yeah, so when you're doing these ones, it's very light touches, and these are more about polishing the blade or the edge. So this one here, I do recommend that you actually do this method, because it's super easy to gouge these corners, edges, and you wind up being counterproductive to the blade itself, actually. So you're gonna have to go back to the other stones. Now, unfortunately, sharpening a blade is always a destructive process, meaning it always pulls little bits of metal away, and that's what you're left with. That's gray. That is very fine metal shavings. When you hear it on that's actually good. Just leave that stuff on there as you're going. You don't have to keep rinsing it off. The key is to try to keep as much of the blade on the stone at one time as you can, and that angle. One of the hardest things to do, too, I'll mention, is the tip, because it's kind of difficult to get that angle exactly right. All I can tell you is the angle doesn't change. Keep that same angle even when you do the edge of the tip. And again, that will become like a needle right at the top. So that's good for the 4,000. Now I usually don't do the 8,000, but I'm going to do it for demonstration purposes here. At this point, 8,000, anything above 4,000, you're really getting into razor territory. And this is, again, more about polishing that edge that you put on than it is about sharpening anymore. This is, you imagine that the edge of the knife is like that as you go along. This is just bringing that edge finer and finer out on the end until it's, again, like a razor. But it also means that the knife, especially on cheaper metal, the edge is more prone to bending over, chipping, or becoming deformed, like kind of almost like a serrated knife, but not in a good way. And that's, on a cheaper knife, you definitely don't want to go this high. In fact, you don't want to go at that angle either. What you want to do is a steeper angle, more like probably 25 degrees. It'll help keep the blade longer. So this is just a really nice light touch. Now I think that's a pretty good edge. I'll just eyeball it here. Yep, it looks good. Hopefully you can see it. What we're looking for is that one shiny bead that runs the whole length of the blade, and that it's uniform. You don't see anything kind of wavy, like there's a mark where it seems like you maybe scored the edge or didn't get it flat on there. So and of course, what good sharpening video would be complete without demonstration. So a sharp knife, any knife, any sharp, decently sharp knife will cut in a straight line, no problem at all. The true test, well, besides the half-ripe tomato, I don't realize you can see that or not. Let's bend you up a bit. There we go. Is if you can cut the sharpness, but in shapes. It's a little wet, the paper, unfortunately. So you can cut shapes into it. That's sharp, and plenty sharp for a kitchen. And that's how you sharpen a knife with your stone. If you have any questions, just let me know.